Do you ever have doubts that the world and the life you lead in it are fundamentally meaningful? Well, there's a great signal in our skies that I believe shows us in clear terms that meaning is inherent to the world that we inhabit. And in this video, I'm going to show you what that great signal is. This is going to be a bit more personal than my usual videos because what I'm going to talk about is something that means a lot to me and put me on the path that eventually took me to astrology. So I'm going to show you what this great signal is, and we're going to think about what it might be telling us about how we should see the world and, yes, even how we should live our lives. Now, I won't keep you in suspense any longer. What I want to talk about today concerns the two largest and brightest bodies that we see in our skies every day and every night, cloud cover permitting, of course. They are the luminaries, the sun and the moon. Now, the incredible thing about the two luminaries is this. They both appear, from our perspective on Earth, to be almost precisely the same size. And the reason for this is that there's a kind of miraculous geometry at work here. The sun is 400 times bigger than the moon, but it's also 400 times further away. So they take up almost exactly the same amount of space in our skies. And there's another way to look at this geometry, and it concerns the number 108, which is held to be sacred in multiple spiritual traditions, including Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism. The diameter of the sun is around 865,000 miles. If you multiply this by the number 108, you get around 93 million miles. And this is the distance from the Earth to the sun. Another way of putting this is that you could fit exactly 108 suns between the Earth and the sun. And the crazy thing about this is that you can do exactly the same with the moon. Its diameter is around 2,160 miles. Multiply that by 108 and you get about 233,000 miles, which is very close to the average distance between the Earth and the moon. And by the way, 2,160 miles, the diameter of the moon, is 2 times 1,080 miles. Can you see our friend 108 there again? But I digress. This miracle of cosmic geometry is the reason we get perfect solar eclipses on Earth. During total solar eclipses, the moon fits perfectly over the sun so that all we see of our friendly neighborhood star is its flaming corona. Now, as far as scientific understanding is concerned, there really is no reason that we know of as to why this is so. So it's worth saying this again. We have two major bodies in our skies: the provider of light, the creative force, the sun, and the gatherer and reflector of that light, the moon. And they are perfectly balanced from the perspective of Earth. The funny thing about this is that a lot of people never think about how unlikely it is. We just take it for granted. But I think we shouldn't. That said, if you point this out to your average astronomer with a column in a science magazine, they'll just tell you, it's just a coincidence, you stupid hippie. Move along, nothing to see here. I love science. Now, I realized how weird this was myself back in 2010. Up till that moment, I believed in the dominant, dreary scientific view of the world that the universe was fundamentally meaningless and chaotic, and it emerged as a result of the immutable laws of physics, and any semblance of design or meaning in life was just a kind of delusion generated by our brains. I don't think we're meant to be alienated like this from the miraculous and, yes, meaningful nature of the cosmos. This is no way to live. But unfortunately, that's how a lot of people see the world today. And I was one of them. But this seemingly miraculous equality of the sun and the moon snapped me out of it. It was almost like seeing God's own signature writ large in the sky. I feel like it woke me up from a kind of bad dream. Soon after that, I started casting the I Ching and dabbling with the occult, and eventually ended up doing whatever this is. And it's something I bear in mind to this day, whenever I want to remind myself that the cosmos speaks to us if we're willing to listen. Now, if you're enjoying this video, please do tell YouTube that and smash that little like button. And if you think you are going to want to see more of this kind of content, do subscribe to the channel. Thanks, you're the best. But you may be wondering, are these perfect eclipses actually that unlikely? Well, yes they are. According to NASA, there are 290 moons in the solar system, and we keep finding more every year. So far, we've counted 95 orbiting Jupiter and 146 around Saturn. And here's the crazy thing, not one of these moons produces perfect eclipses of the kind we get to experience on Earth. It's not that eclipses don't happen on other planets, it's just that ours are particularly spectacularly special. For example, Mars has 2 moons, Phobos and Deimos, but neither of them is large enough or close enough to obscure the whole of the sun. And in the case of some other moons around other planets, the moons appear to be much larger than the sun, so you don't get that beautiful corona effect that we get on Earth. What you need for a perfect eclipse is for a moon to be round in shape, and you need the perfect ratio between the size of the moon and its distance from the planet it orbits. Now, according to a paper written by an astronomer named Guillermo Gonzalez, which I've linked in the description below, there's only one other moon in our solar system with roughly the right ratio of size to distance, and that's one of Saturn's moons, and its name is Prometheus. Prometheus is an apt name in the context of solar eclipses, of course, because Prometheus was the Titan in Greek myth who stole fire from the gods. Eclipses, eh? But here's what Prometheus the moon actually looks like. It's an ugly potato-shaped thing. Sorry, Prometheus. And it obviously couldn't fit over the sun in the perfect way that our moon does. So in our solar system, perfect eclipses only happen on Earth. And as far as we're currently aware, Earth is the only planet that's home to conscious beings who could actually look up and appreciate a perfect eclipse. I take this as a clear sign in the sky of some kind of exquisite balance and, yes, design to the cosmos, particularly as it pertains to humanity on Earth. Of course, I'll admit that this is really a position of faith. For me, it's just too uncanny to be a coincidence. At the same time, you can find countless articles written by scientists who will tell you in an extremely matter-of-fact manner that it is indeed nothing but a coincidence. But guess what? That's a position of faith too. Their faith tells them that there can be no fundamental design or purpose to the layout of the cosmos. It tells them that nature doesn't trade in the symbolic, and it's impossible that this miracle can be anything other than a fluke. I think I know a miracle when I see one. With all that said, this is all rather ironic because without eclipses, we might not have ended up with our modern science at all. And I'll tell you why in a minute. But before we get into that, I just want to interrupt the narrative once again to let you know that I'm currently taking bookings for private consultations. If you're intrigued by the information I present on this channel and want to know what intriguing things astrology might say about you and your life, this is your chance to find out. I meet clients from all over the world on Zoom to help them situate themselves in time and understand their past, their present, and their future, or simply to help them figure out questions of purpose and what they really want to do with their lives. I use a variety of modern and traditional techniques, including transits, the 36 decans of the zodiac, lots, zodiacal releasing, progressions, and astro mapping to help my clients answer the most important questions in their lives. If you're interested in getting some of that, find the details in the description below. And now, back to the narrative. Eclipses were of huge interest to ancient peoples such as the Babylonians, who observed correlations between eclipses and events on Earth, as astrologers still do to this day. If our moon was either smaller or further from the Earth, it wouldn't cover the sun and eclipses wouldn't plunge the world into darkness. They'd have been much less interesting to our ancestors. And if the moon was much larger or closer to the Earth, eclipses would happen much more often, they wouldn't be so rare, and again, they probably wouldn't have seemed so important. But our eclipses are just right. And they seemed so important to the Babylonians that they developed mathematical techniques to predict them. And this ultimately led to the development of geometry and mathematics and astronomy over time, and their knowledge was taken forward by other peoples who cared about eclipses, like the Greeks and the Indians and the Islamic civilization of the Middle Ages. And eclipses have been crucial to the development of science much more recently than that too. You might have heard of a certain scientist named Albert Einstein. In 1915, Einstein came up with the theory of general relativity, the one he's really famous for, which said that gravity wasn't a force but a distortion of space-time. Einstein said that objects like stars and planets bend space, just like a bowling ball on a trampoline. But Einstein needed to prove that his theory was correct. And in 1919, an opportunity appeared that would allow him to do just that. And that opportunity was the total solar eclipse of that year. In May 1919, an astronomer named Arthur Eddington traveled to the island of Principe off the west coast of Africa and took these photographs of the total solar eclipse. And the images showed a slight change in the position of the stars around the sun compared to where they're normally seen when the sun isn't there. In other words, the images proved that the sun was literally bending space. This proved general relativity and made Einstein the most famous scientist in the world. So if it wasn't for eclipses, Einstein couldn't have proved his theory like that, and it might have taken a long time before he figured out another way of doing it. So our perfect eclipses aren't just pretty. They've also influenced the course of history in a very real way. Now, if you agree with me that the sun and moon's apparent equivalence isn't just a coincidence, you might be asking an obvious question about the moon. Why is it so perfectly sized and positioned? And I don't know the answer to that. Some people claim the moon is an artificial satellite placed where it is by some unknown parties in the distant past. Yes, I know that's a wacky theory, but all I know is I know nothing. Or perhaps this is just how the Creator, if you believe in one, designed our part of the cosmos. Personally, I tend to favor this explanation, and I see this beautiful geometry as deeply symbolic. And if it is symbolic, what might it be telling us? In traditional astrology, the sun and the moon were seen as symbols of the masculine and feminine. Perhaps today it would be better to say yin and yang, the receptive and active principles. The sun radiates and the moon gathers and reflects. The sun rules the day, when most of us go out into the world to get things done, and the moon rules the night, when we retire and reflect and dream. And to this day, in astrology, the sun is seen as having to do with the spirit, the intellect, the divine spark. And the moon has to do with the feelings, instinct, and intuition, or you could call it the soul. And I think we're seeing in the sky a sign that both of these ways of knowing are equally important, that they should be in balance. And interestingly enough, we can see here a reflection of how our brains themselves are divided. The late Robert Schmidt, who pioneered the recovery of Hellenistic astrology, said that the basic nature of the sun was to select and prefer, while that of the moon was to include and gather. In his book, The Master and His Emissary, the psychiatrist Ian McGilchrist explains how our brains are divided into two hemispheres. To make a broad and somewhat crude generalization, the left brain selects pieces of information in isolation and analyzes them and draws conclusions, while the right brain sees the whole, the gestalt. It sees everything as connected and part of a context. The similarities between the sun and moon in astrology and the two hemispheres here are genuinely uncanny. So despite what some moderns like to think, ancient peoples understood deep truths that we're only just figuring out today. And we see here a close correspondence between the cosmos and the psyche. Now, it goes without saying that both of the hemispheres are essential to our ability to function in the world. But McGilchrist argues that over the course of the centuries, since the Enlightenment, we've come more and more to emphasize the left brain's way of seeing the world. We've become very good at taking things apart and seeing how they work, but we've increasingly disdained the symbolic, the intuitive, and the idea that everything is connected and part of a greater whole, which is more the right brain's way of seeing things. We've stopped treating our environment as if it's something that we ourselves are part of and seen it as something external to be manipulated. Another way to put this is that we are, more than ever, solar rather than lunar beings. But in the sky, the sun and the moon are in perfect balance. It's McGilchrist's argument that we've lost that balance, and I think the sky agrees with him. Now, if you're a regular viewer of this channel, you'll know we believe in astrology around here. And anyway, the channel's name is something of a giveaway. Of course, astrology is something that the dominant paradigm of the day sees as misguided at best and downright dangerous at worst. And in the West, at least, astrology hasn't been seen as acceptable for right-thinking folks since perhaps the 17th or 18th centuries. Astronomy, on the other hand, continues to be perfectly well respected. And yet, astrology and astronomy used to be the same discipline. Without astrology, there'd have been no astronomy. And I wonder if, in the casting out of astrology from the academy and from acceptable discourse, we also see something of McGilchrist's left brain, right brain division. Of course, both astrology and astronomy require left and right brain thinking. There are very technical left brain style astrologers, just as there are visionary, intuitive, holistic thinkers in physics and astronomy. But if we had to divide these two disciplines into two camps, I'd say that astronomy is the more left brain of the pairing, the more solar discipline. Astrology is more right-brained, more lunar, because it holds that everything is connected. What happens in the celestial sphere is symbolically reflected in mundane reality. As the Hermetic dictum has it, as above, so below. That said, every astrologer knows you can't do astrology without astronomy. Imagine if it turned out, when we truly understand the role of consciousness in the cosmos, that you can't do astronomy without astrology either. Now, over the past several centuries since the Enlightenment, we made incredible scientific progress which resulted in us solving a lot of problems that used to cause people great suffering in life. And at the same time, we've created a lot of new problems. We don't view our planet as an interconnected whole, and things are getting increasingly out of balance. And what's more, many people find there's something very empty about the mechanistic, spiritless world that science holds to be our reality. Some people of a spiritual persuasion will argue that the past 400 years since the Enlightenment were a big mistake, that we took a wrong turn. My own belief is that we were meant to go through this phase of development, this left-brain solar period, however painful its excesses might be. We had to turn our backs on the gods in order to understand a little more of how this world is put together. But that came at a cost. And I think that what will come in the coming centuries is a readmittance of the intuitive, holistic, lunar perspective into the realm of acceptable thought. This is what the sky tells us, that there should be balance between the solar and the lunar perspectives. This applies in the grandest terms to civilization itself, and it applies within our individual lives. I also think that part of the return of the holistic perspective will be a revival of astrology, something we've seen gathering pace in recent years. And in this video, which is the first ever video I made for World Astrology Report, so excuse the newbie awkwardness, I explain the reasons why I think astrology is set to grow in the coming years, decades, and centuries. Enjoy, and I'll see you next time.